Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's do another entry here, once again based on one of your new suggestions. This one easily being one of the most bizarre, unusual entries I've ever talked about within my channel here. I had to reread this information several times, and ever since then, I'm still trying to grasp 100% of what this story is. It makes sense, but at the same time, you know how you read sometimes where truth is stranger than fiction? I think in this case, this applies to it. But it's definitely a story that has stood the test of time when it comes to the very unusual epitaph, the very unusual slogan that's associated with Tombstone, and all these legends as to why that particular slogan is there, why it's tied to that woman. It's been haunting that tombstone for all this time. And so essentially you're looking at a picture of it here. So let's go ahead and let's talk about the urban legend itself. Automatically you'll see why it starts off on a bizarre path. It's known as Lily E. Gray, victim of the Beast 666. Crazy stuff, right? When it comes to this, immediately you can see why I just had to pick this for this particular playlist here. So again, let's go ahead and let's talk about all the fascinating information associated with this truth is stranger than fiction tale. So here's essentially what happened. You have to go, and everything starts off with one woman, a woman by the name of Lily Edith Gray. There's little to some information known about her, and also little to some information known about another gentleman that I'll talk about here in a minute. It's hard to wade through the concrete stuff and try to see like what's truth and what's fiction, because even today a lot of that stuff is still not 100%. But what we do know is this: she was born on June 4th, 1880, there in Manvers, Ontario, Canada. And for all intents and purposes, she pretty much lived a normal life right from birth all the way to death, which is kind of like something like it's popping the bubble when it comes to this urban legend, because you would think with a slogan like that on someone's tombstone that there would be a lot of nefarious things tied to her lifestyle, so many other strange twisted tales. But no, as it turns out, she pretty much had a normal life, even ended up dying a natural death. And that's why I wanted to mention this at least up front, because again, this is some of the information that has turned out to be 100% true. But yes, she came from a big family. She was one of 8 children. She ended up moving to the United States. She ended up marrying several times, in fact. First guy that she married was a guy by the name of Richard C. Walsh there in Chicago, Illinois. This was back in 1918. There was a big age difference, though, between them. He was 67, she was 38. This led to that marriage not lasting too long because of his age. He ended up dying of natural causes. And so, cut to the second marriage, she ended up marrying someone else, and this was less than a year's time period, or actually a little bit after that time period, a guy by the name of Frank Zimmerman. And when that occurred, they were able to be closer in age. It ended up being her longest marriage, in fact, because she was 46 at the time, he was 50, so again, closer in age. They ended up being together for 17 years, but he too ended up passing away of natural causes. And then in 1950, for whatever reason, Lily Gray ended up moving over to Salt Lake City. In fact, her movements between various parts of the country still remain mysterious to this very day. Not much is known as to why she was hopping around so many places throughout the country, but still, she ended up finally moving over to Salt Lake City in 1950, and then that's when she met this guy, Elmer Gray, who ended up being a big part of the end of her life, like towards the later stages of her life, and who many presume has to do with the tombstone itself. Interesting that his last name was Gray as well, right? But Elmer Gray was another guy who, again, has some information known, but not too much about him. He was born on March 12, 1881, and apparently, even from a young age, he was someone that was on the bad side, the wrong side of the law. He was eventually in juvenile detention, and then eventually getting out of it, growing older, spending time with an actual prisons themselves, just for robberies and other type of misdemeanors. And he would be in and out of those prisons. There was, in fact, a certain time period where it seems like for a good stretch, maybe 10 plus years, he was essentially living a life outside of prison with his family somewhere there in Denver. But eventually, his past caught up to him. His nefarious activities just couldn't stay away, and he ended up doing a form of second-degree burglary, and this is what ended up causing him to go to jail for another extended stint, over 10 years, in fact. This type of situation, though, gives a hint into his mindset. Apparently, he was someone that, I don't know if something was wrong with him, like let's say in the mind, if he was like a conspiracy person when it comes to the government, if he was someone that was just not there altogether, because he would give bizarre rants as to why he was in prison. Like when he was putting in applications for parole, it turns out that he was stating not only different names for himself, but different things that happened to him. Like, for example, the reason why he was at a store when it came to him being found for that robbery was because, according to him, he was on vacation. He was married to a wife. Whenever that vacation was happening, he was being robbed. In other words, by unknown assailants. They ended up murdering his wife. He ended up being shot not just once but twice. And so he was somehow trying to commit this robbery for reasons tied to it. And he just kept embellishing over and over again. Obviously, with no injuries, no records of a murder, no records of assailants doing anything bad to him. It was just him digging a hole deeper and deeper, and he would just continue to do this stuff. Eventually, he was found, like, in other words, eligible for parole, but this was ironically after he decided to say really what happened. Like, he told the truth. He gave his true information, and then he gave the reasons for it, and he was out. After that time period in 1948, that's when he was released from prison. He ended up moving to Salt Lake City as well, and then that's when he met Lily Gray. It is unknown how the two of them exactly met, but it must have been love at first sight, because shortly after, and this was somewhere around 1950, that's when they ended up marrying. That's when they ended up meeting. And then about 2 years later, in 1952, that's when they ended up marrying. It was at a courthouse in Elko, Nevada. And at that point, he was 71 and she was 72. And they lived at a small house that today is some apartment building, but for all intents and purposes, they lived a very quiet life there. Still, though, there were hints as to Elmer's bizarre nature, as to what was impacting him and what he was thinking, like when it comes to being victimized, the government, the doing things to him, and so on. Eventually, though, she ended up passing away as well. She was, again, as I mentioned earlier, someone that just died of natural causes. It ended up being pulmonary embolism and then also kidney failure. But whenever she was placed into the ground, and when the tombstone was there, all indications seemed to point that it was Elmer Gray that placed that very bizarre slogan on her tombstone. He's the only one that could have ordered something along those lines. There was no one else, like not a care center or other family members that would have done something like that. Like, what kind of family member would say that, yes, victim of the beast 666, let's go ahead and let's place that on Lily Gray's tombstone? Now, again, all indications point that it was Elmer that did this because of his anti-government rants. He was someone that he thought, again, was persecuted throughout his entire life by the government, and even in her death, there's ideas that he blames the government for what happened to her. And so that's essentially why that slogan is there as far as victim of the beast 666. He's stating that the indications are that it was the government itself that he's referring to as the beast 666, and then that's essentially why it was listed there. And according to information as to his death afterward. He ended up living first with some, I think it was like a care center of some sort, but he ended up passing away there. He's buried in the same cemetery that Lily is actually buried there as well, but his grave is very, very far away. He doesn't have anything fancy on his own grave. Instead, it's just an indication of the years that he was born and he ended up dying at. But again, all indications say that yes, it was truly him that ended up doing something along those lines with regards to that bizarre slogan. Here he was taking care of her up until her very death, blaming the government for not just for his life, but everything that happened to her. And then that's why he decided to place that there, which is kind of sad when you think about it, because in this case, Lily lived a normal life. The other theories that I was mentioning earlier as to what happened, like why the slogan is there, there's this idea that she was someone that was involved with satanic cult like Satanism and so on, but that is very, very loose. Like there was nothing that indicates that she was ever into any of those type of activities. But again, having this on the marker on the tombstone itself, that's what people naturally think. Another notion is this, that the reason why this slogan is placed on her tombstone is because she was involved in a car wreck on Highway 666, back then when it was called actually Highway 666. But again, none of this is indicated on the death certificate. She ended up dying of natural causes, nothing related to an actual car wreck. So again, everything seems to point to just Elmer Gray having these mental problems, if you could call it that. There was also the idea that he was suffering from Parkinson's disease, which brings in forms of hallucinations and other type of mental activities. So there's that notion too. So, but in any case, yeah, isn't that weird? Truth is stranger than fiction, but it's also more boring when it comes to the truth associated with Lily Gray and everything as far as the slogan that's associated with or linked to the tombstone itself. Imagine having that on your tombstone. Victim of the Beast 666 forever for anyone to see that comes by that cemetery. In fact, people still visit it to this very day and leave little treats, little trinkets there because they want to commemorate what happened to Lily Gray and all the urban legends tied to her. But if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. What about those of you that went to that particular grave? If you've had the chance to do so, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about that encounter whenever you finally got to see this very, very infamous grave tied to this urban legend. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.